Hello, friends. Welcome to Friday Live with Gladiator Consulting. My name
Great.
is Rachel D'Souza. I'm very excited to host a really powerful, what I hope to be a really powerful conversation with my colleagues and friends, Sara and Tamyka. As you might know from either being in the St. Louis region or following the social medias that are coming out of St. Louis, it has been 1 year and actually 1 week since the F3 tornado tore through our community back on May 16th, 2025. It changed our neighborhoods, it changed our family, it changed the way we think about connections. And we find ourselves in our community still fighting for the resources needed to clean up, to heal, to rebuild, and to grow together. So today, asking our community members, leader of a nonprofit organization and one of our individual community members, to share a little bit about how our community responded, what we learned recovery requires when we might think that something is everybody's job, and maybe when something is everybody's job it's actually nobody's job, and what happens when nonprofits absent of city support or a ton of philanthropic support decide to lead for the communities that they serve. So I guess why don't we go ahead and start with some maybe brief introductions about who you are and why you felt the need to respond, individually or institutionally to the crisis that impacted our community last year. And Sara, I will bring you in first.
Okay, sorry. I was thinking about how I was going to answer that question, but I'll start with the easy part. So, as Rachel mentioned, Sara Howard. I live in Tower Grove South. I do work with Rachel actually in the Gladiator team, and actually one of my primary clients is an organization called Acres. It's a food justice organization that's based in North St. Louis, and its mission is actually to build a more equitable, sustainable food system for the people and owned by the people of North St. Louis. So I was actually on a Friday Live when the tornado hit, and it was a really strange moment because, there were no sirens going off in the city, but one of my colleagues who lives very close to the county, she could hear sirens because they were going off in the county. And when it became clear that there was a lot of damage that was happening, for me, the question of whether to get involved, that wasn't even a question, right? Really, the
Sure.
question for me was, what was my best role, and where could I plug in most effectively? Um, and there, I'm sure we'll get into a larger conversation about what was happening on the ground. Um, I spent a lot of time that first day trying to get my arms around where the need was, because
Sure.
information was so fuzzy. And
Yeah.
I'll be the first to admit, I spent a lot of time that first day glued to the TV, watching these really horrifying events unravel in real time, of people being like dug out of collapsed homes, and
Yeah.
live electrical wires on the ground. And it just seemed like it was everywhere. And you're looking at this landscape that you're familiar with,
Mhm.
that all of a sudden is completely um, alien, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. But then the next day, it was like, let's go, let's get on the ground, let's figure out what people need,
Yeah.
let's find out from the people on the ground what they need right now, and let's try to rally the troops and get it there.
Yeah. Yeah. Tamyka, I want to go ahead and bring you in too. So, what was your experience in those early days?
Um, as soon as the tornado hit, I was actually in Clayton. And
Mhm.
in the office building, it went I don't want to say over us. It went kind of through us. And so when I emerged from the basement and exited our building, I had to physically dig myself out of the parking lot that we were in because everything was down around us.
Mhm.
And there was an early child care center right next to us. And there was a tree that was 2 feet from collapsing directly onto the center. It had decimated the playground of the center. The children, thankfully, were safe in the center, but everything around us was down. Power lines were down, gas lines were down, but we didn't realize the gravity of it until the sirens of the emergency vehicles were going by.
Mhm.
And I had to pick my children up from school. And it was really a tale of two cities because West, nothing had really happened and people didn't realize it. And so I went to get my child from school and went to my son's eighth grade graduation while simultaneously navigating phone calls to assist with triaging the assistance to dig folks out of Centennial Church because they couldn't get through to 911. And so I'm navigating that as well. I have family who live in the West End, and I grew up in the West End, and it was decimated. And so my aunt is also there. And so I'm calling and checking on family members, getting them help while I'm also working, living this
Mhm.
family life. And people on the other side of town did not know how bad it was, truly, until they saw it. And so I also immediately reached out to a friend of mine who worked for Action St. Louis because they started asking for volunteers within hours of the tornado hitting and asked them to support the child care community. And they said yes without hesitation. And we started working together to build an early child care tornado response team and began supporting that community, not just the providers, but the families as well. And across the ecosystem, we reached out to over 100 childcare centers
Mhm.
that were in the zone. And there were 44 in the direct path of the tornado, and of that 44, 40 were directly impacted. And these weren't just centers, these were family home providers, meaning that they were not just the workplace, but the
Right.
homes of these individuals. And some had lost everything. And
Yeah.
they were afraid to talk because they were afraid they might lose their license. They were afraid to ask for help. Some had a home laying on top of them. So we went into immediate triage mode,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I was boots on the ground with the community immediately from the time that it hit, working with the community.
So, whew, yeah, I mean, what I hear from both of you is that you both didn't necessarily understand the gravity of the situation right off the bat, but you knew something terrible had happened. But then
Mhm.
within a few hours, really began to realize the need. Here in St. Louis that weekend, a couple of things happened. We had a nonprofit organization, Action St. Louis, who went out that night, to drive the community and see what had happened. And by Saturday, had started to, stand up donation hub for folks. And at this point, I mean, we're just talking about getting, water to people and trying to organize generators and getting, houses tarped and things like that. For my part, I will tell you that weekend I happened to be in Minneapolis with my children traveling, and we actually were doing a Gladiator live on Friday afternoon with our colleague Amy Bossy and a good friend of ours, Deanna Farias Heinrich, that lives out in California. And Amy actually had to go to her basement while we were on the call. And I've grown up in the Midwest. I know that we have this kind of weather, but that night had our nonprofit clients calling us to say, like, I don't have power. I'm worried about the elders in my neighborhood, being able to access medicine. So even in Minneapolis, that weekend, I'm starting to sort of figure out, okay, like, who do I need to introduce and who do I need to connect? And I think I really began to understand the gravity. This was not a regular old tornado rolling through, as we have a lot of, tornado warnings here in the spring. But it was really when World Central Kitchen reached out to me and said, hey, sounds like things are not good. Like, who can we get connected to and what can we do? And when I think about that organization, I think about extreme situations. And I thought, if they're reaching out to us, this is really terrifying and bad for our community. Why do you think in those early days, nonprofits and community leaders were so willing and able to just jump in and do this work together?
I think
You go first as a
yeah.
nonprofit
Yeah.
leader.
I think a couple things. I think because truthfully, we'd never seen anything like this, and there was no movement happening. So
That part.
nothing was being done. No one was coming to save us, and so we had to save ourselves.
And who
That
do we think should save us? Like, we all live in this community together. When
Mhm.
bad things happen, like, who do we expect to hear from first?
Yeah, I think there's an expectation of government assistance, and not in a like we're relying on the government to help us all the ways kind of way. But I think historically, you think like FEMA will come in. You think that there are bodies that will come and support you, and we see that all the time on the news when natural disasters happen, or that the city will come in and start working, and there will be movement, but the city hosted a party or supported a party that night of the tornado downtown, right? While people were struggling. And that was our reality. And there was no help. And so we truly had to help ourselves in that
Mhm,
moment. And it
mhm,
happened on a Friday night. Um, and people knew, I think there was a feeling that if we don't do this now, even though we're told not to self deploy, it won't get done.
Yeah.
And that
mhm,
was only further evident in with Action standing at the hub on that Saturday with the expectation that on Monday that there would be relief from government, and that didn't happen on Monday. And then they would be able to be relieved on Wednesday, and then that didn't happen on Wednesday, and
mhm,
that timeline just kept getting pushed out
Yep.
for
mhm,
months, right?
mhm, mhm,
Um, that the need wasn't emergent, it was urgent.
mhm.
Um, that's why everyone stood up and helped one another.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
honestly, Tamika, if you didn't say it, I was going to, right? It's um, the I, what I witnessed was, to be honest, like the product of years and decades of self-organizing and collaboration on the ground amongst members of the community, nonprofit leaders, because even though we had never seen this before, let's be like, I think the reality is that in St. Louis, we've experienced a very slow moving devastation of our community without any kind of real coordinated sustained institutional
Mhm.
response for so long that people have, in some respects, I don't know that there was a real expectation. Everyone knew we're going to have to do this first. If the government winds up stepping up and coming in, great, but we're not waiting.
Mhm.
Right.
And Tamika referenced the fact that there was a call to not self-deploy. And look, I am one of those people that I am always going to be willing to give the benefit of the doubt. I understand from a government standpoint, from a governance standpoint, and a public safety standpoint,
Yeah.
the desire to tell civilians, don't put yourself in danger.
Mhm.
However, when that is happening in the context of you're hearing your neighbor cry for help,
Mhm,
or you work for a firm, a company that does architectural work, and so you have access to equipment and
right.
workers who understand building structure and who can go in and rescue someone. Like,
Mhm,
you're not gonna you're not going to wait around. And when you know that the police and the fire department are not even capable of covering the breadth. I mean, that tornado was like a mile wide at the point that it hit North St. Louis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it took out everything.
I think, and also when put into perspective, the tornado sirens didn't go off.
Correct.
911 is not working.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. And even if it is working, the phone lines are down.
The phone lines are down.
Right.
You know,
Right.
So one of the things that I think about in a crisis, a natural disaster, let's just use that term, like this, or any crisis, there are 3 phases of response, right? There's the immediate response. What are we doing to save life and limb? That the community stepped up, filled in the gaps. I know that there were police and firefighters out there that were helping people. And the reality is that there were also neighbors helping neighbors, folks from across the region who were rushing in to save life and limb.
There were people from other states that
Absolutely.
came into St. Louis.
There were journalists who were on the ground and who were coordinating with first responders to send them to where they saw something urgent, right? Which is frankly exactly what's supposed to happen. Everyone comes together.
Right.
And then there's the second period where it is, what
like
are we
the immediate doing? Crisis has passed. We have
Correct.
Started to assess.
And you are now trying to determine how to, if you think about like the hierarchy of needs, you were trying to make sure that people have food, water, clothing, shelter. And that is where I think we saw the initial huge collapse. And then to have that move into phase 3, when you're talking about recovery, rebuilding, and restoring the infrastructure that any community needs to function.
Yeah.
I mean, those latter 2 phases, I think, have been the most devastating part of all of this. And I don't think we will know the full toll of what has happened for years or decades.
Yeah. You know, I think when, as we were moving out of those initial phases, I think, the city named the damage, at about $2 billion and was, very clear upfront that they didn't have that kind of money and we're going to need assistance, from the state, from philanthropy, from the federal government. Then you have FEMA taking over 50 days to even decide to declare, this event a disaster and offer support. I was on the first call with some of our philanthropic funders, which, the tornado happened on a Friday, the call happened on a Tuesday, right? And I know that you had some people that came out that weekend who were ready to fund, who were ready to move money very quickly. And then you had a group of folks who were maybe less familiar, less proximate to the situation, who, said, oh, well, my board doesn't meet till June. And I'm not really, we've already allocated our funds for this year. And so one of the things that I really, think about is a lot of these nonprofit organizations that jumped in, their work isn't crisis response. Their work isn't in direct service needs, right? There were multiple full-time jobs around, executing grants and programs and managing teams and reporting deadlines, all these things. How do you organize yourselves and organize your resources in this moment? And I ask this question because this isn't going to be the last crisis point that St. Louis finds itself in. And quite frankly, whether it's, climate related or politically related, we've seen a lot of cities experience significant crises, for example, with the clawback of SNAP funding or the Quebec federal funding in general. There's fires in California and floods in Texas. You know, this is, we are in a new normal. You know, how do we balance the work that we do with the reality now that the systems that are in place aren't equipped to meet the needs of our community?
Tamyka, you want to go first?
Who wants to take that one? That was
like, I'll let you start that one, Sarah.
I don't know whether there was a question mark on the end of that sentence or a period, right? You know, look, I don't know if this is going to be the best way of answering this question, but I think that, you know, I continue to be surprised in the way that institutions, and by that I mean local government, some of the funding institutions that Rachel, you were referencing a moment ago, but or sometimes just, you know, regular old folks continue to believe that we are in a business as usual moment. And we are not. And quite frankly, we haven't been for a long time. The idea that anyone paying attention believed that FEMA was actually going to step in and do what their job is, that there was going to be any motivation for a federal government to play the role that it has played in the past is baffling to me. It is baffling. And in some respects, I think that the model of what we saw in that immediate response and in the weeks and months afterwards, what happened with the St. Louis community, and I want to be very clear here. This was one of those moments where, you know, I don't think folks in North St. Louis were like, anybody who's paying attention should not have been surprised that Action St. Louis immediately swooped in. They had an organizing system to deploy. They had a very sophisticated process to make sure that they got out the immediate needs that people needed right away, right? What's also true is that Action St. Louis isn't necessarily in the best position to be able to be in charge of like the rebuilding, right? And there's no way that one organization can cover all of the needs. But what the other thing that actually did surprise me is the way that the entire region plugged into the infrastructure that Action had created. And I'm not like, I was shocked to see white St. Louis, West County, South County, like Southern Illinois. Everyone said, okay, like most people didn't say, well, what's the city doing? How can I get things to the city? People realized pretty quickly the city was not functioning in that capacity, and they plugged in. And I think it was actually, I am really hopeful that two things happened from this. One, I hope that there were, and I'm going to be like, just very like transparent in the language I use. So
great. That's
if
what we're here
for. White people, I'm sorry. Well, sorry.
No, we do not care. We do not care.
We do not care. But I think there were a lot of people, a lot of white folks who came away from that experience with like a real like perspective shift of understanding what is happening on the ground. Like none of this bullshit you hear about like, well, listen, like if people are so concerned, if Black folks are so concerned, why aren't they organizing in their community? Why aren't they taking care of their community? Bullshit, right? Like you saw firsthand, you saw with your own eyes what the Black community is known for forever, right? That the Black community does take care of its community with whatever resources it can. The other thing that I think that, so I hope that there's like organizing potential that is like across the region that we can tap into coming out of that. Because we're all in this together. The other thing that I hope that people take away from this, and this is like me talking to the governments, is like, you can't act like local and state governments and regional entities. You can't act like it's business as usual either. There has been a complete paradigm shift in this country in terms of the way that things function. And regardless of whether this is the second Trump term or the last or the second of however many, I don't know. It does, and frankly, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
This paradigm shift, this kind of paradigm shift, once it happens, it's really hard to go back to the institutions that we once relied on. Oh, and and let me be clear also, by we, like who relied on, right? Like these are institutions that haven't necessarily been there for communities like North St. Louis to begin with. And hopefully this is a wake-up call for everyone.
Yeah. So Tamyka, I want to give you the last word. Don't want to steal too many. We could talk about this all afternoon, quite frankly. You know, as we continue to navigate things, as this community continues to fight for $150 million to make North City whole, what do you want to make sure the community doesn't forget?
150 million is only the start of making this community whole. It's only the beginning. I think that's part of it. I think that it's important to understand that while action stood up, it's going to take more than action to get this done. I think it's important to know that in this, it also showed where the work is actually being done. And that we can't wait for if the next disaster happens, but it's going to be when. And we have to be prepared for it because, to Sarah's point, there's going to be another disaster. I think philanthropy has to prepare for it, the community has to prepare for it, and there's not going to be a government savior. We have to save ourselves, and that has been made evident.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you both for being here. Thank you for being the type of people that put on your hero capes when the time came and did everything that you could to support. Seriously. From making sure kids were taken care of and had formula diapers to getting Broadway billboard skims here to wrap people's homes. And I saw so many pictures of Sarah standing in line with carts at Home Depot. I can't even, count. We became, logistics planners and meal preppers and, gardeners, and all of this. And I think it also reminds me that, we are more than our jobs. We are more than the role in our family. When we say that we are members of a community, it means something very special. So if you are listening, whether you're inside St. Louis or not, please feel free to visit Action St. Louis's website, take a look at the People's Response. Our local St. Louis Community Foundation is also operating a fund that you can donate to as well. You're also welcome to reach out to us here on the Gladiator team, hello@gladiatorrds.com, if you want to figure out other ways to get involved. So I thank you both for your time today. We started a little late because, Friday, long weekend vibes, but we got it. And so I'm grateful to know both of you. I hope you have a rest-filled weekend. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.